Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving. Today, with us, we have a remarkable guest, Professor James Lang. He's a professor of practice at the Kaneb Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Notre Dame and is the Emeritus Professor of English at Assumption University. He's the author of 6 books, including the bestseller book, Distracted: Why Students Can't Focus and What You Can Do About It, which we will dive deeper into today. He has co-founded the Lang Family Foundation, in which Dr. Lang donates 10% of his earnings from writing to charity. Before we continue, Dr. Lang, please share more about yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I was an English professor for about 20 plus years at a small college in Massachusetts, and I taught courses in literature and writing. But during that time, I became really interested in teaching and how to improve higher education, how faculty members in college and universities can improve their teaching, their courses, and ensure they're being able to reach students today. So I'd written a few books about that, and so then I became more and more interested in that particular focus in my work. And so I founded a teaching center at Assumption University, which is the school I was at. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to leave full-time teaching and instead kind of divide my time between writing and speaking about these issues. And then the other half, I still teaching, but less than I used to. So this now allows me to keep writing. I've written, I think 7 books now, and I write things on a regular basis for different publications. And I give a lot of talks to faculty members at lots of colleges around the country. So I give them workshops and lectures on the subject of this book and some of the other books I've written.
That's interesting. So is that what inspired you to research in the area of focus and attention?
Yes, as I describe in the book, I over time I sort of noticed that students were having more trouble managing their technologies in the classroom, and that they were sort of being, and this was like in the early days of the smartphone, right? And so they were new, right? So they were more novel to students at that point, and so it was hard for them to resist using their phones in the classroom in ways but they were at that point they were still trying to hide them because they didn't want me to see that they were doing that work, using their phones. And so I just started to notice this struggle that some of them had. Even my best students were having this struggle, and so I just kind of just started thinking, why are they struggling with this? Like, what makes it hard to put down your phone at that point? And I had been sort of a late adopter of cell phones myself. I've had a smartphone now for many years, but at that time, I really wasn't using them very much. So I didn't really understand the appeal probably as much as my students did. And so essentially, I was just trying to understand the problem my students were facing. And I also heard many teachers were saying the same thing. Like, as they were getting smartphones, they were saying, "I'm having trouble concentrating on my own work and the work of teaching." And so then I started thinking, well, there's something strange going on here. Like, I want to find out what it was. And so that's how I started to get. And of course, I have 5 children, and so that's another issue that kind of was at the forefront of my mind. At that time, they were all in high school or middle school, and so this would have been like 2018, 19, 20. So they were all in high school, middle school, or college, actually, even. And so I was trying to understand them too. And so this was just my way of investigating. When I'm curious about something, I like to write about it because it helps me then work through the ideas and try to understand it for myself. And if I find something useful there, then I want to share it with other people.
Yeah, I liked how you mentioned that when you're curious, you write about it to share with others. I
Yeah.
like that. So, to understand the basics, is the problem we face right now that students are getting distracted easily by phones and other things, or is it that their attention is on the wrong thing? And then, Why is our attention span so low? Because research has shown that even a goldfish has a higher attention span than humans now.
Yeah. So attention spans are extremely complex. So like we hear a lot of things about this, like the goldfish thing and the fact that for example, in class students can pay attention for 15 minutes or something like that. Actually, it's just it doesn't work like that exactly. Or your attention is actually cycling in and out all the time. So even when you're focusing on something, you're essentially like kind of like think about when you're reading something. Like you're reading the words, but occasionally you read a word or a sentence and it makes you think about something else. And for a minute, you're a second, your mind goes to that other thing. Then it comes back to the reading. And likewise, when you're watching a television show, you know, you're watching the show, you're lost in the narrative, but also it's reminding you of things, or you're suddenly remembering, oh wait, I have popcorn in the microwave. Like it's like your attention is always kind of being fractured in some way. So it's almost a myth to say that we have this sort of attention span that lasts for this long and then it gets distracted to do something else. It's kind of like all the time on the move. And so it's kind of hard to pin it down to some particular time period. And that's just how brains worked. And there was a good reason for that. And as we were sort of evolving as humans, it was actually very helpful for us to have your eyes and mind in lots of different places. Like I'm talking like early humans, like right as we were, in like wild environments, right? Like they had to be very aware of what's going on around them. For example, like predators or like animals they were trying to hunt, or the weather and looking for shelter. I mean, then that kind of situation, it would be actually a bad idea for you to just like look at the ground, right, and focus on one thing or have in a deep conversation while these other threats are going on around you. So like our brains kind of evolved to be very aware of kind of be on the move, be very attuned to novelty in our lives. And so that's just part of who we are to a certain extent. So having said that, though, so having said there's no real like formal definition of attention span or like any formal attention span. Um, we also know that it helps us sometimes to really try to zone in and to work through a problem. And so I think that the reason I wrote the book was to say, listen, you shouldn't beat yourself up if you feel like you're not paying attention all the time. At the same time, it's a skill that you can get better at to learn to pay more attention to something you're reading or in school or in church or like wherever you're trying to pay attention, or when you go out in nature, right? You're trying to like absorb the beautiful surroundings and not just look at your phone. That's a skill we can get better at. And so that's something I think I'm trying to argue in the book is, if you care about it, you can get better at it. And in the book, I try to show some of the ways that we can do that.
Yeah, okay. So basically, it's not staying focused on one thing because we've been trained since we were back when we were monkeys that we can't
Yeah,
only focus on one thing. We have to be aware of there's a tiger coming here and everything. So we can't
yeah.
just focus on one thing.
Yeah,
And then,
that's just kind of what that's how we evolved, right? And so like we still have those brains. There's a great phrase from one of the writers I cite in the book. It says that we're ancient brains in a modern world, right? And so that's kind of an interesting way to think about that, right? So our brains have been like our bodies, like the shape of our hands evolved over a long period of time, and it was designed to kind of solve the problems we had. But our problems like they change too, right? So we don't have to hunt anymore. We go to the grocery store, right? So like but we still have the brains that grew up in that other context.
mhm, I like that, the ancient brains in a modern world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so as I was reading your book, Distracted, you mentioned that we should not try to prevent distraction, we should cultivate attention. And one of the ways you mentioned in your book was that building a community. So community comes first and then content comes later. So could you please expand on that and just on other general ways to cultivate attention?
Yeah, so man, what I was talking about there is the notion that when you're in a classroom experience, like for example, like whether a student or a teacher, um, you know, attention is hard, and we can actually support each other in paying attention. And there's a phenomenon called joint attention. And for example, like if like a little kid, if you're intently staring at something, most people actually, or even adults, if I'm just sitting in public, I'm staring intently at something. Most people actually will kind of want to see what am I staring at, right? Because my attention draws the attention of other people, and so and likewise, like if we're sitting together in a classroom and you're doing something that's distracting, I'm going to be distracted by that too. Like, and I gave the example in the book when, like, you're in an airplane, and if someone next to you is watching a video on their video screen, it's like an action movie, right? And you're trying to read your book. Well, your eye keeps going to that other screen because it's like these flashing lights and no, that guy's getting, he's getting attacked and that kind of thing. And so in a classroom, we can help each other essentially by trying to focus together on something instead of just everyone doing their own individual things. That makes it much harder to pay attention. The other part, so that was the community of attention thing. The other thing I think is really important is, and I think maybe this is a question you have to maybe ask me later, but how do we get our attention better? What do we have to do? And not so much worry about like taking all the distractions out of your life, because I'm not sure that's really possible these days, right? I mean, we use our phones for so many different things now. It's not just like social media or texting people. It's your maps. It's I just went to like concert last night, and I'd use my phone for the parking, to get in the parking garage, right? So like with the QR codes, like they're so entwined in our lives now. It's very hard to just pull that away from that. Having said that, I think that the thing to do is to cultivate activities that require you to focus and actually reward you for focusing. And so I've been doing this in my own life. I like to do things like I write in a journal, and I put my phone away when I'm doing that. I actually like to just practice guitar or piano, and so I'll spend time just doing that. And likewise, I'm not looking at my phone. I'm just kind of focusing on that activity. I actually like to learn languages too, so sometimes I will practice my language or whatever I'm working on. And so likewise, and even when I take walks and stuff, sometimes I bring my phone and listen to stuff. Sometimes I don't. I just I'm going to take a walk and I'm just going to see what I see. And so my argument to people really is build more of this stuff into your life. That's really the solution. And the more that you do that, you'll see the rewards of it, and they'll incentivize you to keep doing it. And then what I kind of found for myself is the more I do that kind of stuff, the more my desire for my phone kind of starts to reduce. And so that allows me then. I've been actually doing this since the new year to recommit myself to this work. And what I've kind of found is my mind has kind of slowed down a little bit. It's not like rushing all the time to try to get to the next thing or like looking constantly at my apps to see what's new. It helped me kind of slow down a little bit and just be more thoughtful. And so that's my recommendation is cultivate the good things. Don't so much worry about trying to get rid of everything that might be just distracting to you.
One way that you mentioned that students can take in charge is to support each other by paying attention. Like in class, if one person's distracted, chances are people around them will be.
Yes.
And then you also mentioned to do things that you enjoy, because then you're not going to be looking out for distractions, and the need to wander away wouldn't be there. And then
sorry. And in school, so students, you mentioned they would middle school students and high school students, right? So like many students play sports and in school, or they do theater or like lots of different clubs, stuff like that. That stuff is great. And when you're doing that stuff, just be there, right? So like when you're at practice, for example, keep your phone in your bag and just enjoy moving your body around, talking to your friends, thinking about whatever you're trying to do. Likewise, when you're, like rehearsing for the theater and other people are on there and you're not on the stage, just watch, right? And just be in that moment with people. So whatever clubs, activities you do outside of school, just keep doing those things and just enjoy the experience instead of just trying to jump on your phone while you're also trying to do that one thing.
So like being in the present, and like the saying is like, be where your feet are.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And another key thing that intrigued me while reading your book was the different types of attention, including curious attention, structured attention, signature attention, assessed attention, and mindful attention. So could you please share more about these?
So essentially, those things are all different ways to think about how do we support someone's attention. So for example, like a teacher, assessed attention means they're grading your attention. Essentially, like they're giving you some kind of evaluation of, um, or an evaluation that would reward your attention. So, like for example, um, let's say I do an activity in class, and I want students to participate in it. I could just certainly say, okay, do this activity, and then I just hope that people will do it. But as a teacher, I might say, well, I'm going to give you some points for doing that activity, and as a result, you're sort of more incentivized to actually put your focus into it, as opposed to when you wouldn't do that. Was that? But maybe I wasn't giving those points. So that would be like a teacher thing to do. The structured attention was more about the idea of, for example, trying to, let's say a teacher assigns you some work and you realize it's going to take you an hour to read this stuff, right? And you have a lot of other stuff to do. You like to be on your phone. Don't try to sit there and read it for an hour without a break. And that's really it's really hard to do that, especially now at your ages. That's a hard thing to do because your friends want to be in contact with you, and you feel this obligation to respond to people's texts as soon as they come in, right? And so instead, read for 20, I don't know, 30 minutes, give yourself 5 minutes with your phone, and then go back and do the next 30 minutes, right? And so put some more structure into that experience instead of just having this sense that I've got to do this in one big go. And likely what's going to happen if you do that is 40 minutes in, you're not really paying attention anymore anyways. Your mind is wandering, your eyes are just skimming the page, right? And so there's a technique called the Pomodoro technique, which is essentially set a timer. It comes from I think the Italian word for tomato, I think. And so you set a timer. It's like those tomato timers that people have in the kitchen, right? You set a timer for 20 minutes. When it goes off, and when the timer is running, you're doing the thing you're trying to do. The timer goes off, set it again for 5 minutes. You can do whatever for those 5 minutes. You do whatever you want. Then when you're done, then you go back and pay attention again. And so you're trying to sort of find ways to put more structure into these longer experiences. So that would be an example of that. So each of those things I mentioned that you mentioned there are just different ways to help us think about how to create better focus in our lives. Yeah.
So you mentioned assessed and structured attention. So assessed is when you're being rewarded for participation, and structured attention is when you manage your time and take breaks using the Pomodoro technique. But what's
Exactly.
the a quick summary of the curious attention, mindful attention, and signature?
Curious attention is essentially just saying that we're going to pay most attention to the things that we're curious about, right? So, like for example, in a school setting, if a teacher's just sort of telling you have to learn this stuff, it's harder for you to pay attention to that as opposed to when a teacher says something. Hey, I know you all are interested in this subject matter, so let's do some work on that. Well, you're more likely to pay attention to that because you're curious about the subject. If the curiosity is coming from you, you're going to follow that curiosity a little bit with a little bit more attention or focus. And so that's really kind of more in the realm of the teacher, to create the kind of experiences that would um, speak to a student's curiosity. Um, Signature activities are again for more of a teacher focused thing. Signature attention activities are like things that unusual things you might do in the classroom that students would like surprise students. Like normally you come to class, you do these same things every day. Signature activity is something like, no, today, we're going outside. We're gonna leave our phones in the classroom, and we're gonna just sit there and observe what we see in the natural world. I mean, or go to the local pond and get some samples and come back and put them under the microscope. That's like a signature thing that really sort of wakes you up because your attention is dulled by routines. You do the same thing every single day. You stop paying attention to it sometimes, and so the sort of unusual thing can refocus your attention. And then mindfulness is, a very common practice that comes from different traditions, religious traditions. And so that is a separate kind of activity that, involves mindful breathing, focusing the present moment. There's sort of religious versions of it, but also like a secular version of it, which people are just using. It's actually used in therapy oftentimes now when people have anxiety or panic attacks or mindful focusing on your breath. For example, like taking 10 deep breaths with long exhales is a way to get your mind focused. So those activities can be helpful for supporting your attention too. So there's in the book I wrote about the fact there's sort of controversial findings about mindfulness in terms of how it can support your long-term attention. And what I essentially argue is just doing things like that a few times is probably not going to have some great impact on your attention. Doing mindfulness over a long period of time can really change your life, but you have to really kind of commit to it to do that. And so this might be a hard time for people, to be in middle school or high school to kind of really doing that kind of work. But as you get older, it's just worth something thinking about. Worth thinking about something like that in case you feel you're struggling with your attention.
Okay, so I understood. So curious attention is paying attention to what you're curious about, which leads you to being more focused. Signature attention is like the unusual things that would surprise kids, so that refocuses attention and keeps life from being mundane. And then mindful attention is also something that's in our control. So that's like different breathing techniques and being in the present. And this one helps support long-term attention.
Yep. Yep.
And yeah, so I was listening to one of your talks, and you were mentioned about the fact that teachers were stewards of students' attention. So how can we turn that around to make students capable of being their own stewards of their attention?
Yeah, that's a really good question, by the way. That's a very thoughtful question because, I typically am writing to teachers, but ultimately, we want people to have their own, ways to getting their attention, where they want it to be. I think that would just argue again, maybe the things I've been saying about trying to find more things that you do in your life that can help support your attention practices, basically, right? So I just maybe sort of repeat that same answer that students needs to kind of need to just maybe the best way to think about this is be more conscious about this and not just sort of always go to the thing that you like in terms of a distraction. Sometimes stop and try to make a choice. I could use my phone here. I could bring my phone with me on this walk, or maybe I'm not going to this one time, or I'm going to leave my phone in my bag or my, wherever in this practice, right? So it's really just more about kind of being aware of it and trying to make a good choice here and there. I don't think people have to sort of, I'm not a big fan of people trying to, change everything in their lives at one point and at one time. So like trying to make your little small choices here and there that can really add up. That's what I would say to students, just be aware of it. Two things, right? Be self-conscious about it, be aware of the problem, and then try to make choices here and there that would help you stay more focused.
So I liked the part where you said to be conscious about where your attention is going, because the small changes add up.
Yeah, and actually, I think about I know that students do this sometimes. In fact, my son, who's in college, told me, when he's doing his homework, he throws his phone across the room to his bed, and then he doesn't. That way, it's just enough space, right, for him not to be able to just grab it in the middle of his studying. And when of course, it's there. He can go get it when he wants to. It just gives one more step that he has to take to get to it, right? And I think that's an easy choice that a student can make.
And so then my next question, you kind of touched upon this earlier about advice on how we can increase our attention span. But now I want to know, how can we increase our attention span in cases where we're putting a lot of time and effort, but we're still unable to see any progress in that area?
Yeah, I mean, you have to first of all give yourself some grace, right? Like, so again, as I kind of explained it, there's a lot of challenges to paying attention. It's not necessarily like an easy thing to do. It's not necessarily even a natural thing to do in some cases. The kind of school-based attention that we want students to have, doing that for 6 hours a day is hard. It's draining. And so I think that's, give yourself a little bit of grace if you feel like you're not achieving the things you want to achieve. I think the other thing I would say at this point, especially giving everything that's out there in terms of, thing you can do, internet searches and AI and that kind of stuff. Look for different things. If the things you're trying are not working, do some searching. Ask the adults in your life, like, what do you do? I mean, most people have adults in their lives who have to do work that requires them sometimes to pay attention, right? So that you might find if you ask adults in your life, they have developed some strategies that might help them. And I actually know a lot of people that who have when they want to pay attention, they have things they do to put guardrails around their activities so they can't just get too distracted, right? And so it's worthwhile maybe just think about someone you know in your life who you admire, who seems like they pay attention to you when they talk to you, or they're very successful, or they're very active in a church or in a school or a community organization. Ask them, how do you stay attention or focused, and then that might be able to expand the strategies you use to one that maybe you haven't thought about yet. But I say, again, the idea here is self-awareness and self-consciousness, and just keep looking, because there'll be no single solution for everybody. So that's the important thing to think about, right? So everything you try might not work for everybody. And so you have to find the thing that works for you.
Yeah, so I liked how you mentioned that there's no single solution that works for everybody, and to give yourself some grace. And then, and today we talked about a lot. We talked about that we're ancient brains in a modern world, and we can't focus and solely focus on one thing. We have to be aware of everything going around us. And then you mentioned, and we talked about the different types of attention, and the types that we're in control of are the assessed attention, where, or I guess we're in charge of structured attention and mindful attention. Structured is, again, where we manage our own time. One way is using the Pomodoro technique, and then the mindful attention, where we can be present and focus on breathing. And then you mentioned the importance of being where your feet are and being present and doing things that you enjoy, because you're more likely to not be wandering around when you're doing something you want. But if you're being forced to finish homework, you're probably looking for every single reason not to do that.
That's right. And by the way, one thing that people, that you're doing right now is really good for attention, right? So you're actually writing down things. Looks like you're doing it on like a note piece of paper, right? That's really good, actually. And so that's a good practice, because you're not also jumping between tabs right now and trying to take notes and taking notes on a document, and then, that tab has something interesting going on in it, right? And you're not jumping between those tabs. And so that's a really good practice, actually. And the fact that you're then repeating it back to me is another good learning practice. So these are really good things to do. Take notes as people are talking in class. If you can, take notes by hand occasionally, and then sort of make sure you can repeat what has been said, so that's a good way to, again, just for learning purposes. So I like it. Good job.
Thank you. So my last question for you is, how can our audience learn more about you and your work?
Yes, the easiest place to find out more is I have a website. It's called jamesmlang.com, and it has all my books, everything I've written there, and kind of links to a lot of different things I've written about attention, distraction, that kind of stuff. So yes, jamesmlang.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. James Lang, for taking your time out today to share with us how we can take charge of our own attention. I learned a lot today, and I hope our audience took away something too.
Right. Thank you.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every month, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we thank you so much for listening.